Subscribe to our channel for more stories of triumph and justice. I'll never forget that Monday morning. The conference room was packed, the air thick with anticipation. My manager, Greg, stood at the head of the table, his smirk cutting through the tension like a knife. I'd spent weeks on the quarterly report, pouring my soul into every chart and figure. It was my moment to shine. But as I began my presentation, Greg interrupted, his voice dripping with condescension. "This is amateur work," he sneered, projecting my slides for everyone to see. He pointed out typos I hadn't made, errors he'd inserted himself. Laughter rippled through the room, not at the slides, but at me. My face burned as colleagues I respected averted their eyes. I stood there, frozen, my confidence shattered. That was the day I swore I'd never feel that small again. Greg didn't just critique my work, he humiliated me. It wasn't about the report, it was about power. I left the room that day with a fire in my chest, a vow to turn the tables. The next few weeks were a blur of rage and resolve. I couldn't sleep, replaying Greg's words in my head. Amateur. Sloppy. Each one stung like a fresh wound. I started researching the company's structure, its finances, its vulnerabilities. I wasn't just an analyst, I was a strategist, and I'd been underestimated. I found out our company was privately held, owned by a group of investors who were growing restless. Profits were steady but not spectacular, and whispers of a potential sale were circulating. I had no money, no connections, just a burning need to rewrite my story. I began studying finance, devouring books on leveraged buyouts and corporate takeovers. Nights were spent poring over balance sheets, learning the language of power. I wasn't just planning revenge, I was building a vision. Greg thought he'd broken me, but he'd only lit the fuse. I reached out to a former colleague, Sarah, who'd left for a venture capital firm. Over coffee, I pitched my idea. I'd buy the company. She laughed at first, thinking I was joking, but my intensity changed her mind. She introduced me to her network, investors who thrived on bold moves. I had no track record as a CEO, but I had something better: obsession. I crafted a pitch deck, not unlike the one Greg had mocked, but this time it was flawless. I presented to a room of skeptical suits, laying out how I'd streamline operations and boost profits. They didn't care about my grudge, they cared about returns. By some miracle, 2 investors bit. They'd back me, but I needed to raise serious capital. I sold my car, cashed out my savings, and took a second mortgage on my condo. Every cent was a bet on myself. Greg had no idea what was coming. The investors wanted a plan, so I gave them one. I analyzed the company's inefficiencies, bloated departments, outdated tech, and yes, toxic leadership. Greg's name didn't come up, but his style did: micromanaging, demoralizing, driving talent away. I proposed a leaner, employee-focused model that would retain top performers and cut waste. The investors loved it, but they needed more than promises. I spent months building a coalition: former colleagues, industry contacts, even a rival firm's CFO. Each meeting was a gamble, exposing my plan to potential leaks. But I was careful, calculated, and relentless. I worked 18-hour days, fueled by coffee and spite. Greg, meanwhile, was coasting, oblivious to the storm brewing. He'd humiliated me, but I was rewriting the narrative. The company wasn't his kingdom, it was my battlefield. By month 6, I had a term sheet. The investors agreed to a leveraged buyout, with me as the front. I'd own a minority stake, but I'd run the show. The deal was risky, millions in debt, hinged on my ability to turn the company around. I didn't care. Risk was just another word for opportunity. I met with the board in secret, presenting my vision while Greg was on a golf retreat. They were impressed but hesitant. Loyalty to the current CEO ran deep. I leaned into their doubts, showing them declining employee retention stats, data I'd gathered from late-night chats with coworkers. Greg's leadership was a liability, I argued, and they couldn't ignore the numbers. Slowly, I won them over. The deal was set, $250 million, with me at the helm. All I needed was the final signature. The day of the acquisition, I walked into the office like any other day. Greg didn't suspect a thing. I sat through his usual morning meeting, enduring his jabs about my mediocre performance. Inside, I was electric. The papers were signed at noon, and by 2 p.m., the board called an emergency meeting. Greg strutted in, expecting to be praised. Instead, the chairman announced the sale. New leadership, he said, and all eyes turned to me. I stood, my voice steady, and outlined my vision for the company. Greg's face went pale, his smirk gone. I didn't gloat, not yet. I thanked the team, promised transparency, and walked out as the new CEO. The room was silent, but I felt the weight of every stare. Justice wasn't just served, it was owned. My first act as CEO was to audit everything. Greg's pet projects, wasteful. His allies, incompetent. I didn't fire him immediately. I wanted him to feel the shift. I moved his office to a cubicle, citing space optimization. He bristled but couldn't complain. I was his boss now. I implemented new policies, open-door feedback, merit-based promotions, and zero tolerance for bullying. Employees who'd suffered under Greg came to me with stories, and I listened. I wasn't just rebuilding a company, I was rebuilding trust. Revenue climbed as morale soared. I hired consultants to modernize our tech, slashing costs. The investors were thrilled, but for me, it was personal. Every win was a middle finger to Greg's legacy. He'd humiliated me in front of everyone. Now I was rewriting the rules. Greg tried to undermine me, of course. He spread rumors, questioned my decisions in meetings. I let him dig his own grave. I documented every misstep, every insubordinate email. By month 3, I had enough. I called him into my office, the one he used to lord over. I laid out his performance review, subpar leadership, divisive behavior. His jaw dropped when I handed him a severance package. "You're done here," I said, my voice calm but ironclad. He stormed out, threatening lawsuits, but the board backed me. They'd seen the numbers. They knew I was right. Greg's exit was quiet, unceremonious, a far cry from the spectacle he'd made of me. I didn't celebrate. I didn't need to. The company was mine now. The transformation wasn't easy. Change never is. Some employees resisted, loyal to the old regime. I won them over with results, bonuses tied to performance, not favoritism. We launched new products, entered new markets. The stock price, once we went public, soared. Industry blogs called it a turnaround miracle. I didn't care about the headlines. I cared about the people. My team, once silenced, now thrived. I walked the halls, hearing laughter instead of whispers. Greg's shadow was gone, replaced by a culture of respect. I'd bought the company, yes, but I'd also bought freedom, for myself and everyone else. The humiliation that started this journey was a distant memory, fuel for a fire that had forged something new. Looking back, I don't regret a thing. Greg's cruelty was the spark, but my ambition was the flame. I turned a moment of shame into a legacy of power. The company wasn't just a business, it was proof that no one could define me but me. I stood in that conference room again, a year later, presenting our record-breaking results. No one laughed this time. They applauded. My story isn't just about revenge, it's about justice. Corporate justice. I didn't just buy the company, I reclaimed my dignity. And I made sure no one would ever feel as small as I did that day. The endgame wasn't just winning, it was rewriting the game itself. The journey to that moment wasn't just about money or power, it was about rebuilding myself. After Greg's humiliation, I doubted everything, my skills, my worth, my future. But I refused to let his words define me. I started small, taking online courses in finance and leadership. I networked relentlessly, attending industry events despite my nerves. Each handshake, each conversation, was a step toward confidence. I learned to speak with authority, to command a room. Greg's voice in my head faded, replaced by my own. I wasn't just preparing to buy a company, I was becoming someone new. The old me would have crumbled that day in the conference room. The new me saw it as a challenge. Every late night, every sacrifice, was an investment in that transformation. Greg thought he'd broken me, but he'd only revealed my strength. The financial side was daunting. I wasn't rich. Far from it. My savings were modest, my condo a stretch even with a steady paycheck. But I saw potential where others saw risk. I studied the company's valuation, its debt-to-equity ratio, its cash flow. I learned terms like EBITDA and synergies, weaponizing knowledge Greg never bothered to acquire. My investors weren't just betting on the company, they were betting on me. I had to prove I was worth it. I worked with accountants to structure the deal, ensuring every dollar was accounted for. I negotiated terms that protected my stake, even if it meant sleepless nights. Greg's mockery echoed in my mind, but it only pushed me harder. I wasn't just buying a company, I was buying control of my destiny. The board meetings were my proving ground. I faced executives who'd known Greg for years, who saw me as an upstart. I didn't charm them, I overwhelmed them with data. I presented projections showing 20% growth in 2 years, numbers they couldn't ignore. I highlighted Greg's failures without naming him: high turnover, missed deadlines, stagnant innovation. They nodded, slowly at first, then with conviction. I wasn't just a disgruntled employee, I was a visionary with a plan. I learned to read the room, to pivot when skepticism arose. Each meeting sharpened my instincts, my ability to lead. Greg had called me amateur, but I was playing a professional's game now. The board's approval was my first real victory, a sign the tide was turning. The day I signed the acquisition papers felt surreal. I sat in a lawyer's office, surrounded by suits twice my age. My hand shook as I signed, not from fear, but from the weight of it all. This was real. I was taking over a company that employed hundreds, a company that had once crushed me. The investors congratulated me, but I barely heard them. I was thinking about that conference room, about Greg's smirk. I'd turned his weapon against him. The deal wasn't just about money, it was about rewriting history. I walked out of that office not as the humiliated analyst, but as the CEO. The title wasn't the point, it was the power to change things. Greg's reign was over, and mine was just beginning. Taking over wasn't glamorous. The first weeks were chaos, budgets to balance, contracts to renegotiate, egos to manage. I inherited a company riddled with inefficiencies, many of Greg's making. His strategic initiatives were pet projects that drained resources. I cut them without hesitation. Employees were wary, expecting another tyrant. I surprised them with transparency, sharing financials in town halls. I asked for their input, something Greg never did. Slowly, they trusted me. I promoted talent he'd overlooked, people like me who'd been stifled. The company started to hum, not because of me alone, but because I unleashed its potential. Greg's humiliation had taught me one thing: a leader lifts others up, not tears them down. Greg's downfall was poetic. He didn't see it coming, even when I moved his office to a cubicle. He thought it was temporary, a power play he could outlast. But I was patient. I let his own actions bury him: missed deadlines, snide emails, open defiance. When I called him into my office, he tried to play the victim, claiming I was targeting him. I showed him the evidence, a paper trail of his incompetence. He had no defense. The severance package was generous, but it came with a non-compete clause. He'd never work in our industry again. I didn't smile as he left. I didn't need to. His exit was the final piece of my justice. The company was free, and so was I. The cultural shift was my proudest achievement. I banned the toxic behaviors Greg had normalized: public shaming, favoritism, fear. I introduced peer reviews, ensuring accountability without cruelty. Productivity soared as people felt safe to innovate. We launched a mentorship program, pairing junior staff with executives. I mentored a young analyst who reminded me of myself, eager but overlooked. She thrived, presenting her first report to applause, not laughter. I saw myself in her, but I also saw the future I was building. The company wasn't just profitable, it was human. Greg's legacy was erased, not by vengeance, but by progress. I'd bought the company, but more importantly, I'd changed its soul. The investors were stunned by the results. In our first year, we cut costs by 15% and boosted revenue by 25%. They called me a prodigy, but I didn't care about their praise. I cared about the employees who thanked me in the halls, the ones who'd stayed late to help me succeed. We went public, and the IPO was a triumph. Shares doubled in a week. I didn't cash out. I reinvested in the company, in its people. I created a stock option plan for every employee, not just executives. They deserved to share in the victory. Greg had built walls. I built bridges. The headlines called it a corporate miracle, but to me, it was justice made real. I never forgot that conference room. It's where I give my quarterly updates now, standing where Greg once stood. The slides are mine, the vision is mine, and the applause is genuine. I don't think about Greg much anymore. He's irrelevant. But I think about the person I was, the one who stood frozen as laughter filled the room. That person is gone, replaced by someone stronger, wiser, kinder. I didn't just buy the company. I bought my freedom from shame. I turned humiliation into power, not for revenge, but for purpose. Every decision I make as CEO is guided by that truth. No one will ever feel small under my watch. This is my endgame. Not just owning the company, but owning my story. I took the worst day of my life and turned it into the best. I didn't need to destroy Greg. I needed to outgrow him. The company is thriving, a testament to what happens when you bet on yourself. I walk the halls now, not as a victim, but as a leader. My team trusts me, not because I'm perfect, but because I'm real. I've been where they are, felt what they feel. Corporate justice isn't about revenge, it's about rewriting the rules so everyone has a chance to rise. I did it for me, for them, for anyone who's ever been made to feel less. This is my legacy. The journey didn't end with the acquisition. Leading a company is a daily battle, one I'm still fighting. Every decision tests my resolve, my values. I've made mistakes, hired the wrong people, misjudged markets, but I own them. Unlike Greg, I don't blame others. I learn, adapt, and keep moving. The company's growth has drawn competitors, sharks circling for a piece of our success. I welcome the challenge. Each hurdle is a chance to prove I belong here. My team rallies behind me, not out of fear, but loyalty. They know I fought for this, not just for myself, but for them. Greg's humiliation was a spark. My leadership is the fire. I'm not just running a company, I'm redefining what it means to lead. The industry took notice. Invitations to speak at conferences poured in, and I accepted a few. I told my story, not the polished version, but the raw one. I spoke about the humiliation, the doubt, the grind. Audiences leaned in, some nodding, others wiping tears. They saw themselves in me, in the struggle. I didn't sugarcoat it. Success isn't a straight line. It's messy, painful, relentless. But it's possible. I shared data, our 30% growth, our 90% retention rate, to show what's possible when you empower people. Greg's name never came up. He didn't deserve the spotlight. My message was clear. You can rise above anyone who tries to tear you down. The applause felt different from that conference room. It felt earned. I started mentoring others outside the company. Young professionals, especially women and minorities, reached out, inspired by my story. I met with them, listened to their fears, their dreams. I saw my younger self in their eyes, hungry, uncertain, determined. I gave them the tools I wish I'd had: financial literacy, negotiation tactics, confidence. I founded a scholarship for underrepresented groups in business, funded by my own shares. It's not charity, it's investment. The next generation deserves better than Greg's running the show. I'm building a pipeline of leaders who'll change the game, just like I did. Corporate justice isn't a solo act, it's a movement. I'm just the one who started it here. The company's culture became my obsession. I wanted a place where people could be their best selves. We introduced flexible hours, mental health support, and diversity training. Not the performative kind, real programs with measurable impact. Our employee satisfaction scores hit 95%, unheard of in our industry. I walked the talk, sharing my own struggles in town halls. Vulnerability isn't weakness, it's strength. My team saw me as human, not untouchable. That trust turned into loyalty, and loyalty into results. We outperformed competitors who stuck to old-school hierarchies. Greg's world was dying, and I was happy to bury it. The company wasn't just mine, it was ours. Financially, we were unstoppable. We expanded into 3 new markets, each a calculated risk that paid off. Our R&D team, once stifled, now led with cutting-edge products. I gave them freedom to fail, to experiment. They delivered. Our valuation tripled in 2 years, and the board pushed for another round of funding. I resisted, prioritizing employee equity over investor greed. They grumbled but relented. My track record spoke for itself. I wasn't here to make the rich richer. I was here to build something lasting. Greg's short-term schemes were history. My focus was legacy, not just profit. Every dollar we earned was proof we were doing it right. I never stopped learning. I enrolled in an executive MBA, balancing coursework with CEO duties. It wasn't about the degree, it was about staying sharp. I studied leaders like Satya Nadella, who turned Microsoft around by empowering people. I adopted his approach: listen, iterate, inspire. My team noticed. They saw me reading, asking questions, admitting when I didn't know something. It made them bolder, more creative. We launched a sustainability initiative, cutting our carbon footprint by 40%. It wasn't just good PR, it was the right thing to do. Greg never cared about right, he cared about winning. I wanted both. The personal toll was real. I lost friends who couldn't keep up with my pace. Family dinners became rare, replaced by late-night emails. But I found balance where I could. I ran every morning, clearing my head before the chaos. I journaled, pouring out doubts I couldn't share. My team became my family, their wins my joy. I celebrated their promotions, their ideas, their milestones. When an employee's kid drew a picture of me as a superhero CEO, I framed it. It reminded me why I fought. Greg's humiliation had taken something from me, but it gave me purpose. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. The industry started calling me a disruptor. I hated the term. It sounded like chaos for chaos's sake. I wasn't disrupting, I was building. But the label stuck, and it opened doors. I sat on panels with CEOs I'd once admired from afar. They asked how I did it, how a nobody bought a company. I told them the truth. Pain is a hell of a motivator. I didn't mention Greg, but I described his type: leaders who rule by fear. They're dinosaurs, I said, and the future belongs to those who lift others up. My story wasn't unique. It was universal. Anyone who's been knocked down can stand taller. I was living proof. 3 years in, the company was unrecognizable. We were a market leader, not a follower. Employees stayed, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Our Glassdoor reviews glowed, a far cry from Greg's era of one-star rants. I walked the halls, seeing faces that trusted me, relied on me. I didn't take it lightly. Every decision, every layoff, every pivot, was made with them in mind. I wasn't perfect, but I was accountable. Greg's ghost was gone, replaced by a culture that valued people over egos. I'd bought the company, yes, but I'd also bought a chance to make things right. That was my endgame. This isn't the end of my story. It's the beginning. I'm still the CEO, still fighting for what's right. The company is my canvas, my proof that pain can build something beautiful. I don't think about Greg anymore. He's a footnote. But I think about that conference room, that moment of humiliation. It's not a wound, it's a badge. It reminds me who I am, who I'll never be again. I lead for the people who feel overlooked, underestimated, small. I lead for the younger me, who stood frozen in shame. Corporate justice isn't just about winning, it's about rewriting the rules so everyone can. This is my endgame, and I'm just getting started. If you enjoyed this story of resilience and justice, hit that subscribe button and join our community for more inspiring tales.